Hey, it brought up all my tabs again. Neat.
Why you look so happy?
Thought he had mispronounced Shay's name for a second.
I put some stuff on.
All right, here's your block allocations. Let me pull up the file for you. Block funding. Yeah, sure.
Shay, can I have the microphone?
All right, here's your presentation. You can scroll with the arrow keys. And then once you're done going through it, the bill is on the next tab. How much time?
Ask her.
30 minutes, just in case there's questions.
All right, fair enough.
That's how long
it's
it's
going
took.
to have the Jayhawk Motorsports.
But isn't that going to be on the? Is that going to be on the block?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be on block. It doesn't matter where exactly.
Yeah, no, it's still.
I don't think there's going to be.
It's better to put them back on where they applied. But it's better to put them back on here. Yeah. So 10,000 minutes.
I'm okay with it.
The assembly will return to order. I love you guys, but if we keep having loud every time we have a break, this is going to take so much longer. We have the chair of the Finance Council and the treasurer to present for Bill 2025-067, a bill to approve the block allocations for fiscal year 2026. I'm aware that we already have a pending amendment from Jayhawk Motorsports, I believe, which we will consider after we get through the presentation and questions. The chair of the Finance Council and the treasurer are recognized for 30 minutes.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan Stoprin. I am the chair of Finance Council for this year. This is my 4th year on Senate. I've been involved with finance for all 4 years.
I am not as that long here. Actually, in my first year in Senate, I'm the treasurer, Ethan Sloggy, and thank you for having me here.
All right, so we're in fiscal year 2026 right now. So in fiscal year 2025, we allocated $821,807 through block funding. And so this was the breakdown of those allocations. You can find them online in the budget book. This year, for fiscal year 2026, we had total requests of $988,000 roughly, and we were able to allocate just over $725,000. So this is more than $250,000 in cuts we had to make. Largely in part due to the deficit we're facing, we wanted to limit the amount of funding we did through block. And so here's the overall allocation. Feel free to take a look at that this is on the bill as well. But I will go through each of these line by line. First up, we have alternative breaks. In the last 3 fiscal years, they received between $21,000 and $27,000. They requested $28,320. They were allocated $23,460. This money entirely goes to student. Oh, I need to discuss a few other things before we do this. So there are 2 new block entities this year, one from Student Case Management, one from Wingspan. Both of those have existed on block before, but they had 2 new programs they wanted to fund. And we prioritized research opportunities for students, student wages, and we were trying to cut travel expenses across the board and prioritize maintaining current levels of services rather than increasing. So back to alternative breaks. So overall, we allocated $23,460, which is in line with what they received in fiscal year 25. The Biodiversity Institute and Natural History Museum previously has received $20,000 fiscal year 23 and 24, $24,000 in fiscal year 25. They requested $24,000 and they were allocated $20,000. This entirely goes to student wages. We kept this in line with what they received 2 years ago in fiscal year 24. Center for Community Outreach. In fiscal years 23 through 25, they received between $65,000 and $69,000. They requested $68,000 and they were allocated $60,000. So they requested went to $45,000 to personnel, $20,000 to general funding, and $4,200 to their website. The committee decided to allocate the full amount to personnel, 3/4 of the amount to general funding, and no money to the website. Center for Learning and Writing Support, they had 3 different programs. The first one we're going to talk about is drop-in and weekend academic support. Fiscal year 25 was their first year on block where they received $5,000. This year they requested $20,000 and they were allocated $7,000. So this is a modest increase from last year, but due to what happened with the funding of their other two, we decided to make this increase here. So that slide shouldn't be there. Center for Learning and Writing Support, Peer Academic Coaching, Wingspan, was not previously on block. They requested $41,150. They were not allocated any funding. This would have entirely gone to student wages, but this did not exist on block before, so we chose not to fund it this year. Their Thesis Dissertation Accelerator, fiscal year 25 was their first year on block. They requested they received $3,000. This year they requested $5,000 and were not allocated any money. This is due to the fact that it is entirely food that this would be funding, and the committee decided that a better use of our resources was towards other things that support students and not food. Jayhawk Motorsports for the last 3 fiscal years has received $9,000. The request was $9,000. It was the decision of the committee to not allocate any money to Jayhawk Motorsports. You will be hearing an amendment about this allocation shortly. This is just the breakdown of where that money goes. And we can always come back to this slide so you know exactly where that goes when we come back to it. That decision was made because it is part of a capstone for the mechanical engineering department, and it affects a small percentage of students on campus. The committee decided to allocate resources differently. KU Band has received between $30,000 and $50,000 for the last 3 fiscal years. They requested $56,000 and were allocated $37,500 this year. They received partial funding for sheet music, the full amount for student wages, and no funding for instruments this year. KU Forensics has received $25,000 the last 3 years. They requested $30,000. This increase was due to rising costs of travel and increased student participation. They were allocated $22,000. This entirely goes to tournament expenses. The Lead Center has received between $90,000 and $110,000 over the previous 3 fiscal years. The request was $107,500. They were allocated $90,000. Student wages made up $100,000 of that, and the Jayhawk Live series made up $7,500 of that. The committee decided to allocate 90% of what they requested for student wages and did not choose to fund any of the Jayhawk Live series. Military Affiliated Student Center, previous allocations have been between $20,000 and $24,000. They requested $24,150. Their allocation was $20,500. So the breakdown is $20,000 of that goes to student wages. The other $500 that was allocated goes towards their supplies. The Office of Graduate Studies. So prior to fiscal year 25, if you look back at old budget books and historical documents, you'll see that they've received a variety of different amounts. And in fiscal year 25, they received $148,000. So prior to fiscal year 25, Office of Graduate Studies existed on both block and EOF, just kind of depending on the year. And so if I put the amount that they received in fiscal year 24, it would look like they got nearly like a $60,000 increase from fiscal year 24 to 25. But that's not actually the case because they were receiving the rest of that funding through EOF that year. So their request this year was $150,000, and they were allocated flat to fiscal year 25 of $148,000. And so this goes entirely to graduate student travel funding. Graduate students are eligible to apply for $750 of travel funding to alleviate costs to attend conferences and presenting research. And so that's what that money entirely goes to. They utilized, I think, the entirety of their budget this year. The Spencer Museum of Art has received between $35,000 and $45,000 for the last 3 fiscal years. They requested $50,000 this year and were allocated $35,000. $25,000 would go to student wages, $25,000 go to programming. The committee decided to give the full amount to student wages and then $10,000 to programming. Student Senate Administration has received $133,000 for the last 2 fiscal years and requested $150,000. That allocation was $140,000. So this is the breakdown that Ethan made for this year. And so the full amount, so 140 was allocated. The full amount will go to student wages, and then it will be up to Ethan or the next treasurer as to exactly how that gets broken down. Essentially, when this money gets allocated, it goes into 2 accounts. One account is for any kind of wages, and the other is for all other funding. So we're leaving that at the discretion of Ethan and future treasurers. Anything you want to add on that?
I probably won't have any discretion. It might be up to the next treasurer, but I'll give my advice on how they should allocate it before I leave.
Okay, student support and case management. For the last 2 years, they have received funding for 1 position. Fiscal year 24 at about $65,000, and fiscal year 25 at $78,000. They requested roughly $144,000 this year and received a little over $80,000. They requested funding for an administrative assistant as well as a case manager. The case manager has existed on block for previous years. The administrative assistant is a position that currently exists. However, it was not funded by block last year. So the committee made the decision to just fund the case manager's salary and fringes. And so essentially with these aren't ones we could really give them part of what they wanted. It was either you fund the whole amount of the position or nothing at all, because you can either fund the position or not. The big event received $5,000 in fiscal year 23, $6,000 in fiscal year 24, and the money in fiscal year 25. They requested $7,700 and were not allocated any money. Their request was for t-shirts and rental site boxes. The allocation amount was zero because the committee decided that they would prefer big event reach out to other sources for funding since they did not receive funding last year either. University Dance Company has received between $11,000 and $12,000 for the last 3 fiscal years. They requested $12,000 and they were allocated $6,000. This was the breakdown of what they gave us. None of us really know a lot about dance, so we didn't want to try to guess what they would need based on the $6,000, what would be most pertinent for them. So we're leaving that to their discretion on how to break that down. University Theater has received between $54,000 and $57,000 for the last 3 fiscal years. They requested $60,000 and were allocated $36,000. So this is the breakdown, and they gave us the different sections and then included within those sections how much student wages would be. So again, our focus was to preserve student wages. So we allocated $26,000 to student wages and then $10,000 to however else they saw fit for their costume, scenery, marketing, etc. So that is all. Here is the total breakdown again. There's it smaller. Questions? Let me pull up the bill.
All right. The speakers have about 20 minutes left. Student body vice president. Can we get a microphone over? Thank you, Simran.
Thank you for that presentation, Megan. So I asked this question actually at Finance Council. So I was curious if you could provide a more in-depth answer. Could you kind of explain why Jayhawk Motorsports funding was cut this year, since historically Student Senate has funded them in the past?
Yes, absolutely. And Jayhawk Motorsports, just for any of you that aren't familiar, has been funded through block and also through Wednesday night funding in previous years. It was the decision of the committee to really focus on preserving student wages and providing funding for things that cover a majority of the student body. So unfortunately, that was one of the ones that took a cut. We had to make over $250,000 in cuts overall. So it was not an easy day. We spent 4 hours deliberating this on a Thursday afternoon. And so it was a decision of the committee that Jayhawk Motorsports would be one of the things that would be cut. Depending on if there's amendment to this or not, Jayhawk Motorsports is a student organization and can apply for Wednesday night funding next year.
Can I ask a follow-up, please?
Hold on. We have a question, 4th row from the back, closest to the aisle.
Thank you, Kate Ecker. I'm a freshman College of Liberal Arts representative. You said that we had to make $250,000 in cuts overall. Why?
Okay, so the way that this funding comes from is, if you all remember when I presented the fee package, Senate has allocated a certain amount that was $20 this year. I don't know exactly. Do you know what the fee multiplier was? I don't know exactly what the fee multiplier was, but essentially we have to, Ethan, along with advisors, and I have some input in this as well, create a budget of how much we have to allocate for block line Wednesday night. And part of that is money has to go back towards the deficit. We are in a roughly $170,000 deficit, so we have to put money back towards that. So everything has to be funded at a lower rate this year. We used to spend upwards of $60,000, $70,000 on Wednesday night funding in previous years. This year, we've kept the limit to $40,000. We've had to be very intentional with our spending, and we have to do the same in all of these funding processes. Did that answer it? I can explain it further if you want. But we created a budget, and $725,000 was the number we wanted to stick to.
3rd row from the back, closest to the wall, Tanya.
Sorry, you can talk too.
Okay, sounds good. Tanya Singh, School of Law. In your speech, or I guess in a previous answer, you had stated that the council wanted to, like, the committee wanted to look at activities that covered the entire student body. Jayhawk Motorsports is like pretty interdisciplinary in that they have members from like, I believe like the sports department. They have like business people, like graphic design and like mechanical engineers. So I guess my question was, how come Jayhawk Motorsports didn't make that cut in comparison to, let's say, like smaller organizations?
Okay, so completely understand your point. I know many people involved in Jayhawk Motorsports, both in mechanical engineering, other engineering, completely outside of it. I was briefly part of it for like a month my freshman year, and I'm math major. So I totally understand that. I was not a voting member on this committee, neither was Ethan, but this was purely just the decision-making process of our committee. I can't specifically speak for what individuals' opinions were, but this was seen as an area that could come back for Wednesday night funding next year if they did not receive their allocation here, was kind of the thought process of they still would have opportunities for funding through Senate. But since we had to make a lot of really hard cuts that day, that was one that unfortunately took a cut.
Just a reminder, we do have the amendment from Jayhawk Motorsports, which we'll get to after all of these questions. Sorry, fifth row in the back, middle.
Hi, Golden Morgan, the Engineering Student Council Community Senator. So you had mentioned that you had a deficit of $170,000, right? There was a drop from last year of $150,000 just in the block funding. Why is it such a large decrease if it's almost our full deficit?
Okay, so from the amounts requested were $988,000. Amount we allocated last year was $821,000. The amount we allocated last year from all of our processes was greater than the amount that Student Senate generated through their fee. So already, just to stay within our fee for this year, we had to lower it to put money back towards the deficit to get rid of that problem for future Senate administrations. It had to be lowered even further.
Further questions? Student body vice president. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Close to the wall, third row from the back.
Was I acknowledged first?
Yes, but this person hasn't asked a question yet.
Hi, Cece Hunter, Community Senator. I had a question specifically about your funding for band. Our band plays for the football and basketball teams and are fairly involved within like Kansas University as just like a construct. Why was the cutting for that funding so steep?
Okay, so I will just say, not to call anybody out, but lots of organizations took very large funding cuts from what they requested. And bands was fairly significant, yes. But one of the things we were trying to do was preserve student wages. We preserved all student wages for band and then gave some money for the other things on top of that. Unfortunately, that was just an area that the committee deemed reasonable to make a cut. And once again, me and Ethan do not vote on this. We just preside over. These are not our opinions necessarily.
Student body vice president, sorry.
Thank you both for your impartiality as expressed. You guys are non-voting members. I am kind of curious. You had explained in my first question, the answer, that the committee prioritized groups that had a large impact over the student body and kind of weren't really niche, I would say. So I'm a little curious about the funding for KU Forensics, of it being almost $22,000 simply for transport or for conference travel, essentially. How does that cater to a larger group than just a small niche group?
Okay, so KU Forensics is something that has been historically funded through this. They are very competitive within the university at a national level, and they did take a cut to what they've received last year and a pretty significant cut to what they requested for this year with their growing organization.
Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought there was more. Yes, Zach.
Zach Lemke, Engineering Senator. Now, I saw that in your presentation, the band received no funding for instrument repairs. However, I think I would just want a little clarification on what the thought process was for that, considering that instruments are, I mean, one of the major things that a band would need.
Yeah, again, no one wanted to make any of these cuts. If we could give everybody exactly what we wanted, that is what we would do. But again, at the end of the day, we had to make more than $250,000 of cuts. We sat there for 4 hours arguing about all of this because no one was really happy with the solution we came to, because a lot of very important campus organizations did not get the funding that they absolutely deserve. On that front, again, we wanted to preserve student wages. And since KU Band was already receiving $35,000 in student wages, the committee decided they could not justify more than $2,500 over that. We voted on several different amounts for the band, if you look back into the minutes on that.
Our desk mics died. Simmer, can we get Catchbox up here?
Hi, Alexis Dominic, first year senator. I was just wondering, are there any groups on here that are receiving funding or components of their funding that can be allocated towards travel?
So Block does not abide under the same rules as Line and Wednesday night funding. So Forensics does use their funding for competition, so that does relate to travel expenses. Office of Graduate Studies is entirely stipends for travel to graduate students to present their research at conferences. Student Senate receives funding that goes towards travel. All of these things do, and it is within the rules of Block. Block has never operated under the same rules as Line and Wednesday night funding. The Line and Wednesday night rules kind of are more similar to each other, and then Block is its own thing because it funds much bigger entities.
Further questions? Tanya.
You said you can?
Okay, thank you. One of my questions is, when making these deliberations for block funding, do you take into account efforts made by an organization to raise funds from avenues other than the Student Senate?
Yes, that is a question that is asked in the application, and it is a consideration on are they receiving funding from other sources. But we cannot really fault these entities if they have historically always received the majority of their funding through Senate to not have explored other avenues if they've been receiving exactly what they need for previous years.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Further questions? We'll go to question in the aisle, fourth row to the back.
Red shirt?
No, white shirt.
Thank you so much. I'm Kate. I understand you guys aren't voting members, but could you summarize why student wages were prioritized to the detriment of a number of other programs?
This money comes from student dollars. We want as much of that money to go back to students as possible. Many students have to work campus jobs in order to be able to attend here and to afford that. So we wanted to make sure that no campus jobs got cut due to what we did. We wanted to first prioritize student jobs.
Further questions? Yes, Zach. Sure.
Okay. In the 2025 budget book for Student Senate, it says for block allocations to Jayhawk Motorsports that they received $12,000 in allocation as compared to the $9,000 on.
I was working based on the application submitted by Jayhawk Motorsports, and that was the number that they submitted that they had received in previous years.
Further questions? Yes. Fifth row from the back.
Golden Morgan, Engineering Catholic Community Center. Unless I'm misunderstanding it, KU Forensics is also an organization. Why were they not pushed to get Wednesday night funding instead of block funding?
That was not a point specifically brought up during deliberations. I absolutely understand where you're coming from, but that was not a point brought up. And once again, we don't really share our opinions on this. We just run it.
Further questions? Any further questions? Yes.
I just want to make a quick clarification. So last year, Jayhawk Motorsports applied for block and line. So 9,000 came from block. This year, only for block, as that's what we were told to do. They're just one or the other.
Thank you. Any further questions for the presenters? If there are no further questions, we'll proceed to the amendment.
Oh, should we hear speeches opposed?
The motion to amend can happen first.
Oh, okay.
The amendment is being made by non-Senate members. Can you move the amendment?
Yeah, motion.
Second from the treasurer. Motion from the chair of the Finance Council, second from the treasurer. Jayhawk Motorsports, are you wanting to come up to the front to talk about the amendment? Thank you. God, did I put you in here? You did message it to me, right?
Yes.
Will, yes. Let me get this put into Teams real quick. Yeah, sure. We're having an issue right now where both of our desk microphones have died, so I've been using this one. How much time do you need? Like 5 minutes? Yeah, I'll give you 10 then. And you're just asking 9,000 on the block proposal?
Yes.
All right, sweet. Enable editing. Present.
Thank you for presenting.
All right, there you go. The presenter from Jayhawk Motorsports is recognized for 10 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Will Norton. I'm currently a senior studying mechanical engineering and serve as manufacturing director for Jayhawk Motorsports. Tonight, I stand before you in opposition of Senate Bill 2025-067, block funding allocations for fiscal year 26, and seek amendment to the bill in its current state.
My bad.
So, Jayhawk Motorsports is an organization that focuses on the design, build, and testing of small formula-style race cars. Each year, following building and testing, we take our cars up to Michigan to compete in Formula SAE international competition against teams from the US, Germany, Austria, South Korea, Great Britain, and more. And to name specifically, we've hosted a team in Brazil before, prior to competition to help them prepare. For over a decade, funding from Student Senate has enabled Jayhawk Motorsports to be at the forefront of Formula Student Engineering, being one of the first schools to manufacture a carbon fiber body, the first school to manufacture and patent carbon fiber wheel rims, alongside complex aerodynamic component manufacturing, setting a benchmark in collegiate motorsport innovation. Student Senate has been a longtime supporter of Jayhawk Motorsports, with our accessible internal records indicating a funding history dating back to 2011, and through discussion, it being possible that we've been funded since 2006. I wasn't immediately able to pull those records, so I can only speak on that. This year, block funding allocations cut Student Senate support for Jayhawk Motorsports 100%. This unexpected change is extremely detrimental to Jayhawk Motorsports operations early in the school year, as it fills important gaps in funding and allows us to make some of our most important purchases, such as computer software subscriptions to perform design analysis, freight shipping for large quantities of composite materials, such as carbon fiber, and the supplementary materials needed to properly manufacture it. Lastly, block funding helps us afford our Formula SAE registration costs for competition, which, upon registering, the team has 24 hours to pay, otherwise we lose our entry, thus completely nullifying our purpose as an organization if we cannot afford this at the right time. At its roots, Jayhawk Motorsports is a mechanical engineering organization with participation from aerospace, electrical engineering, alongside computer science students, and having a large end in the project. To add to this, Jayhawk Motorsports has an entire business team composed of students in marketing, finance, administration, accounting, and more, who make great contributions to the back-end logistics and operations of the organization, such as preparing a business presentation for competition, coordinating with other clubs and companies for PR events, marketing and social media material, alongside organizing partnerships for the unveiling of our race car. Furthermore, some students I want to point out, Andrew and Evan, are part of School of Architecture and Design and Liberal Arts and Sciences, and they help a lot with our graphic design and photography efforts. Furthermore, individuals can be seen in schools such as sports management, biology, and I've mentioned previously English and visual communication, specifically in your schools, Andrew and Evan. This organization means a lot to people like me and the rest of the team that have shown up tonight. In my case, the outcome of this legislation has no effect on me because I'm graduating in a month. However, my concern for how this would affect future teams and their opportunity to learn and grow as students and leaders is very real. To conclude, block funding is vital for Jayhawk Motorsports and will have a detrimental effect on its operations if it is not amended. As an organization, Jayhawk Motorsports casts a wide net and provides a wide variety of learning opportunities, and it would be disappointing to see this negatively affect future team members, many of whom decided to come to the University of Kansas upon touring our shop through engineering campus tours. On behalf of Jayhawk Motorsports, I'm opposing Senate Bill 2025-067 in its current state and seeking amendment in the form of reinstating the initial funding request of $9,000. Thank you for.
There has been a motion there has been a motion and a second to amend Bill 2025-067, the block funding proposal, to insert an allocation of $9,000 for Jayhawk Motorsports. As a note on background, out of the total budget for the Student Senate activity fee, our proposed allocation for line item funding for tonight is lower than the budgeted amount for line item funding. Accordingly, we can add $9,000 onto the block funding proposal without exceeding the budget for the Student Senate activity fee. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Our Constitution provides that an amendment to the block funding proposal in the Students' Assembly must receive a 2/3 vote in favor to be carried. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I'd like to discuss. Could we please proceed with questions for the speaker prior to entertaining the amendment?
Sure.
Thank you.
The speaker, hold on one second. The speaker has 5 minutes remaining. And yes, the student by Vice President.
I have two questions. Okay. The first question is this a capstone requirement for engineering students?
So, as it exists, it is a capstone program. Within the mechanical engineering department, there are several options for students to pick, and those are widely advertised through campus tours and recruiting by the School of Engineering. Does that answer your question?
But do all students do it as a capstone?
No.
Okay.
Again, there are 3 main options that students can pick from, that being biomechanical, industry, which those tie together a little bit as they provide different smaller project opportunities. Jayhawk Motorsports being the other one.
Any other questions?
I said I had two.
I know, one question and then we move on. Nathan. You have so many microphones.
Sorry if this question's a little bit similar, but does it cost students anything to be involved with Jayhawk Motorsports? And I understand that the answer might be a little bit different if you're seeking to use it as a capstone, like Ivana mentioned.
No, it doesn't cost a dime for students to participate.
Further questions?
Do I see my name? Douglas Jamal, Community Center for the BSU. I heard you mention the engineering school. This is what you're underneath. Are they supplying you with any funding at all?
Yes, the engineering school does supply us with funding. However, the main concern with that is the funding we receive after the school year starts. So it's about a month and a half, 2 months after it starts. So a lot of these purchases that we make with block funding fills that gap where we don't have access to funds we need to operate under normal conditions, particularly with competition registration. We have to use block funding to be able to afford to register.
Further questions? Yes, Zach. It's okay, accidents happen.
I know Jayhawk Motorsports receives a lot of volunteers to help build your car, especially from incoming freshmen and new students to KU who may not have a lot of experience. Can you please elaborate on just kind of the educational opportunities and hands-on opportunities that students may receive for being a part of this organization?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the year, the design team focuses on actually building out how the layout of the race car is going to be put together. At that point in time, that provides a lot of opportunities for volunteers to help with engineering drawings and things of that nature, which kind of helps them get ahead on some of their early curriculum, such as their computer graphics course. Alongside that, we have some light manufacturing that begins at the beginning of the year. So that gives students opportunities to do some light machining work And in particular, we focus on carbon fiber rim layup from the beginning of the year. So it gives students an opportunity to get their hands on carbon fiber layup and understand that process. Continuing, as manufacturing begins in the winter, we provide a lot more ample opportunity for students to get their hands on materials to begin learning machining opportunities, such as mill and lathe, and also using our CNC.
Further questions? See a question in the back.
You mentioned that Jayhawk Motorsport is an option for capstone for MEC-E students. Do you know if, like, so that means people pay a certain like 4 credit hours to take the assignments that is under Jayhawk Motorsport, that is Jayhawk Motorsport. So maybe the car building track, forgive my terminology. Does Jayhawk Motorsports receive a portion of that credit hour payments that engineering receives for the 15 or 20 students that are using Jayhawk Motorsports as their capstone?
I wouldn't say I directly know. My assumption being that we are funded through the School of Engineering and the department is that that could be a possibility. I would lean towards the side that probably is the case. Though, of course, this does not cover a significant portion of our funding.
Yes.
We do not get any of the funding from like our fees or whatever we have to pay to like take the class. What it goes towards is a GTA for who has to be down in the machine shop at all times. Basically, they sit down there and they make sure that we don't hurt ourselves using machines. And so that's where if any of that money goes towards anything, it goes towards the School of Engineering and that GTA specifically. But we do not get any of that funding directly or any of the fees directly.
Thank you. Further questions? The student body vice president. I understand. I once got a block of wood shot at me in wood shop.
So earlier you had mentioned that last year your organization applied for both block and line funding. Why this year did you only apply for block funding?
My understanding from previous leadership and discussions with them as we transitioned is that when we applied for both, we were told not to do that. I don't really have much further clarification regarding that. But that was what we were told, to my understanding, is focus on one and go from there.
Thank you. Speaker's time has now expired. Is there any objection to proceeding to a vote on this amendment? All right, hearing none, we will get the poll posted to the Assembly voting channel. The poll is up now. This will be a 1-minute vote. As I said earlier, amendments to the block funding proposal by the Students' Assembly require a 2/3 vote for passage, so please get your vote in now. Oh no, I misspelled Bill. All right, it's better now. Still not working for you?
Like safety self-interest or
preservation.
Yeah.
We're not saying it's a right option, but this guy is a right option.
It's not a right option. It's definitely a wrong.
Yeah, not a right option.
Oh, are you gonna go sleep?
I just closed the poll. The Assembly will return to order. On the question of amending Bill 2025-067, the block funding proposal to insert an allocation of $9,000 to Jayhawk Motorsports, In favor, 34, opposed, 3, abstaining, 1. Accordingly, the motion is carried and the bill is amended to add the $9,000 allocation. With that amendment considered, is there any objection to proceeding to a vote on the block funding proposal? Hearing none, we will get that poll posted to the Assembly voting channel. Putting it up now. The poll is now posted to the Assembly voting channel. This bill requires a 2/3 vote for passage. This will be a 1.5-minute vote.
Certainly a wrong option. Yeah, line 35. We don't have it.
Yes. So Ivana came in with about 10 to 15 minutes from SUA.
It was like literally right now at the beginning of assembly. There's a couple. Huh? She does it purposefully when you're not here. Student Senate on it too. Student Senate and SUA. I'll place it on.
Yeah. Do you guys remember that Jayhawk Motorsports presentation where they like brought the parts in to show us? Do you guys remember that? I miss show and tell presentations. Not enough clubs have been giving us things to pass around.
Point of information, it was Jayhawk Aero Design. That's why they got cut.
The Assembly will return to order. On the question of passage of Bill 2025-067, the block funding proposal, in favor 35, opposed 0, abstaining 1. Accordingly, the bill passes unanimously. We will proceed to the next item on our agenda, which is Bill 2025-068, a bill to approve line item allocations for fiscal year 2026. This bill will be presented by the Chair of the Finance Council and the Treasurer. How much time do you guys want?
Just do 30.
Yeah, easier.
Shay, microphone me. Yeah, well,
The presentation is on the tab before that.
thank you.
The full screen button is at the top. Yep, got it.
Ready?
The Finance Chair and the Treasurer are recognized for 30 minutes.
Hello, it's Megan and Ethan once again. Did you miss us? All right, so we're going to talk about CDF line and activity fee line. In fiscal year 25, CDF line allocated just over $11,000. The activity fee line allocated $102,615. This is what those allocations were. Go look at last year's budget books if you want to know more. But I will talk about everything. This year we had requests totaling in roughly $73,000, and we allocated $57,000 between the two. CDF line, we allocated 11,570, right on line with what was allocated last year. In activity fee line, we allocated $46,150. Here's the overall allocation for student senate activity fee line. Here is the overall allocation for CDF line. Again, you can look at these on the bill. Just some notes: per an amendment made this year, no organization can receive more than $10,000. So even though we are kind of operating with a bigger budget than we had allocations here, but just because a club or organization requested something did not mean we fulfilled it just because we had that money to do so. Because in actuality, we need to be putting money back towards the deficit. We need to have money to spend for Wednesday night next year. So we don't actually have that money, but we kind of had a hard line on where we didn't want to go over, but we still wanted to fully consider every single request in its entirety. We had an emphasis on less food funding, except in the case of cultural events. We still don't know next year's enrollment, so exact numbers on things are still up in the air. We had 18 groups that are relatively, I think it's between 12 and 18. I don't have the exact number, groups that applied in fiscal year 25 that did not apply this year. So more money we might want to go towards Wednesday night funding next year because of this, and that'll be at the discretion of the new treasurer. And then again, we need to work on the deficit. And all of these organizations are eligible to receive Wednesday night funding. So if they didn't get exactly what they wanted through line, they're always welcome to come back next year to any Wednesday night funding meeting. First up, we have activity fee line for African Drum Ensemble at KU. They received $7,100 in fiscal year 25. They requested $7,200 this year, and they were allocated their full amount. They had 2 honorariums and then $100 in general funding. All of this was met in full. Next, we have Asian American Student Union. In fiscal year 25, they received just over $5,000. Their request this year is $15,000, and they were allocated half of that at $7,500. Once again, they cannot receive more than $10,000 per the amendment we made to the Constitution last fall. They received full $100 for general funding, partial of their request of $450 to $250 for the pool party, partial of Thanksgiving at $100, partial of Taste of Asia at $2,550, the full amount for Masu X, and then the spring conference. They did not receive funding. They can come back next year for that funding if they would like. But since that was a further off event, we decided not to prioritize that. The end of year banquet, they received partial funding at $900. Black Student Union last year received $8,650. Their request this year was $8,000, and they were allocated the full amount. This goes to cover the Big 12 conference. The other $650 were for a couple events that they hosted last year, but they did not request funding through this source for this year. Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Graduate Student Organization received $1,850 in fiscal year 25. This year they requested $2,100. And this was granted in full, $100 of general funding and 2 speaker honorariums at $1,000. The Department of Clinical Child Psychology Graduate Student Organization was not online in fiscal year 25. They requested $1,300 and received $1,250. This is the breakdown of that: the full amount for Graduate Student Appreciation Week, full amount for Speaker Series, full amount for the internship panel, full amount for Admin Appreciation Day, $200 in general funding and support rather than $250 that they requested, and the full $50 for their end of year gathering. KU Community Garden received $800 in fiscal year 25. They requested $950, and they were allocated $800 to stay flat for fiscal year 26. So they wanted $300 for the Fall Garden Workday. That's granted in full. $200 for the Garden Open House, granted in full. And then the Spring Workday, they requested $450 and received $350. The reason we did not grant the full amount is because they have not used a significant portion of their funding this year. So we did not feel comfortable giving them an increase. We gave them a flat fee. KU Gamers in fiscal year 25, they received $400. Their request this year was $500, and they were allocated their full amount. They wanted $100 for general funding and $400 for a Hawk Week event. KU Mock Trial in fiscal year 25 received $21,900 due to our new limitations on funding, they cannot receive more than $10,000. Their request was $10,000 and their allocation was $10,000. So this breaks down into fall tournaments, which is the bulk because they have more students going to those tournaments. There are more tournaments they're attending, and spring tournaments gets the remaining $2,350. Next up, we have KU Tango Club. In fiscal year 25, they received $5,500. Their request this year was $8,000, and they were granted $6,500. They requested $2,500 for their fall and spring workshops each, and then $3,000 for weekly lessons. Their fall and spring workshop requests were granted in full, and then weekly lessons, we gave them 50% of that request. And the rationale behind that is they have found a lot of outside funding for their fall and spring workshops, whereas for their weekly lessons, they have not really explored other funding sources, so we kind of wanted to see that same effort put towards the weekly lessons. Psychology Department Diversity Committee received $1,100 in fiscal year 25. This year they requested $1,200 and they were allocated the full amount, $100 of general funding, and then guest speaker honorariums at $1,100. KU Viola Club received $700 in fiscal year 25. Their request was $1,100 this year and their allocation was $1,100. They requested $600 for a master class and performance, and then $500 to put on their Viola Day event. The Society for Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science, they were not previously online in fiscal year 25. They requested $3,400, and their allocation was $3,100. They received full amount for general funding. The movie screening, we decided not to fund here. Their art workshop, Indigenous Art Workshop, was funded in full at $2,400, and their write-in event was funded in full at $600. The Latin American Student Union previously received roughly $7,700 in fiscal year 25. Their request was $7,900 and they were allocated $4,500. They received $100 in general funding. Their fall and spring cookout was cut by $800 to $1,050. General meetings was cut to $650, and Hispanic Heritage Month was cut to $2,700. They have not used, the reason for this cut is they have not used their funding from this year, and last year completed a lot of their requests at last minute kind of thing. So we want to see them, work ahead of time to use their funding. So we didn't feel comfortable granting them their full request if they had not been using this funding. But we did not want to completely cut them. Vietnamese Student Association in fiscal year 25 requested $2,000. Received $2,000. This year they requested nearly $7,000 and were allocated just under $4,000. They received the full amount for general funding, their Mid-Autumn Festival, and their Lunar New Year. They requested $3,000 for conference. However, they submitted their travel funding exemption bill after the deadline, so we were not able, per the Constitution, fund their conference. Here is the overall allocations again. Are there any questions?
The speakers have around 21 minutes left in their time. Are there any questions? I see a question from Tanya.
I'm sorry.
You got it.
Oh, I got it. It hit my face, but I got it. It hit my face, but I got it. Okay. That's fun. Okay. One of my questions was, I believe you enumerated this in Finance Council last week, but there is some requirement for applying for block funding versus line funding that was a difference between mock trial versus forensics. Could you explain that again? There was something about a sponsor.
Yes. Caitlin, do you know exactly? Because from what I understood from what Matea and Jennifer said last week, it had to do, if you were on block, you had to have someone who worked for the university working with your funding. That was kind of my recollection of what Matea said. I don't actually know the difference. I just receive the applications. I don't work on who applies to what. Okay, yeah.
I didn't hear the question.
She was asking, what's the different, what are the requirement differences to apply for block versus line?
Yeah, I want to give you the exact information, so let me look it up and I'll get back to you all.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up if nobody else has one.
Are there any further questions? All right, seeing none, your
Okay.
follow-up.
One of my questions is, So when doing the block deliberations, I noticed that there was kind of not a prohibition, but let's say for like the thesis accelerator, you kind of like slashed any funding for food. But here with the Department of Clinical Psychology CSO, you permitted $450 to go towards food funding, and I was wondering why that is.
Yeah, so within block, we were facing, I showed you the numbers we had to make just to get to the line that we had to be at. We had to make $250,000 in cuts. In this instance, we did not have to make those same decisions, and we do in our constitution have a $500 food funding limit, so we kind of abided by the same thing there. Unless it was for cultural events, then we allowed more, but we kind of did not want to go over the 500 mark for any group that wasn't using food for cultural purposes.
As a brief clarification, the block deliberations happened first, then the line item deliberations, which affected the committee members' abilities or their perceptions of the budget. Further questions?
Megan, the block and line descriptions are in the Student Senate Constitution starting on page 75. It's about 10 pages long, but you can all take a look, page 75 and down on the Constitution.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Treadwell.
Could we please get the catch box up?
Hi, I'm Valerie. I'm the first year student senator. I was just confused. The grand total on here is like $100 off from the grand total on your slide. Which one is the correct number? Or maybe I saw it wrong.
Let me look at my slide. Oh, it's because Viola Club is $1,100, not $1,200.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We'll get that fixed. Thank you for letting us know.
So it's right on the presentation?
Yes, it's 1,100.
So it's 1,100, okay. Further questions about the line proposal? All right, hold on one second. Viola Club, $1,100 brings this to $46,150. Brings the grand total to $57,720.
Yes, that's
All right,
accurate.
cool. It's fixed on the bill now. Sorry for that. Are there any further questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will proceed to motions and speeches. Motion to vote. Is there a second? Motion to vote from the Vice Chair of the Student Rights and Affairs Council, second from the Student Body Vice President. Is there any objection to proceeding to a vote on this bill? All right, hearing no objection, the poll is now out in the Assembly voting channel. This bill requires a 2/3 vote for passage. This will be a 1.5-minute vote. Vote in favor if you are in favor of the line allocations. Vote no if you are opposed to the line item allocations. If you are having trouble voting, please come to the front. We can record a voice vote for you. All right. Revision, Haskell resolution done.
Check the radar.
You ready to present? Sweet. And then we have
Chris, wouldn't it be better if Megan just chaired? Wouldn't it be better if Megan just chaired this presentation? So that way you're on standby for questions and we don't have to volley back and forth.
If you want, I can love to present it. Sorry, no, not just I can love to answer questions with you.
Oh, I think.
Okay, cool.
I mean, if I start having major trouble, yeah, I think I'm okay.
Closing. No, I'm. Are you serious? The assembly will return to order. Everyone, Thank you. On the question of passage of Bill 2025-068, the line item funding proposal, in favor 33, opposed 1, abstaining 0. Accordingly, the bill passes. We will proceed to the next item on our agenda, which is Bill 2025-069, a bill to adopt a revised constitution. 1 second to get the presentation.
I was gonna say, where do I need to go to get the presentation?
Hold on, I'm just trying to get the files. Okay, I pulled up the accessibility amendment already, and here is the.
Oh, I couldn't present.
Yeah, I wanted to.
So it's all okay. I see.
All right, there you go. How much time do you want? 30?
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
gonna try to be concise.
I don't know why. We're making good time.
I wish.
We did the BSUs though.
The assembly will return to order. Everyone, please take your seats. Show respect for our presenter. The chair of the Student Rights and Affairs Council and chair of the Constitutional Review Committee of 2025 is recognized for 30 minutes.
Hi. Okay. So I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. And I'm hoping I'm a little bit more organized than I was in councils last week. But bear with me because it is a little itty bit boring. So just bear with me. So the guiding principles that we have for this entire process is that we were making no large changes to the founding principles of our Constitution. We wanted to make it able to use in the future, easier to read, easier to use, easier to amend, and also to current practice so that when people are not just student senators, but other students are looking at our Constitution, they know what's going on and they know that what they're reading is what we actually do. Those are what we're most trying to do. So the things that I'm bringing up are what I expect to the differences to be the least known within the body and otherwise, so that I can try to answer questions before people have them, if that makes sense. So you guys can update whatever I don't get to after. So this is the main overview what we're going to be talking about. So there are 7 titles. And then after we're done talking about the titles of the Constitution, we'll go to the University Senate Code, which was also a part of this bill. So there are all of those. Okay, to start with, Title I. This is the Student Senate overall title. The main articles I want to talk about are the one that are asterisks, so 3 and 4. So 3 talks about compensation for officers, specific legislative officers, and the stipends that they receive. And this basically just made it uniform that everyone gets $250 a semester, and that they have to go through KUHR. It just outlined procedures that we were already using, but in the Constitution. And then archival of records, it requires certain actions to be taken that weren't required before. So hold on, let me go to the exact part I was looking at. It requires that they put it through teams. It requires that they work with the Spencer Research Library. Yes, thank you. And then the other part of it is handling of sensitive records is a new part that we added, basically saying that we don't have to archive records if they contain sensitive material to senators or other people. Those are the main parts there. Okay, Title II is a bit of a doozy because it goes through every single part of the legislative branch. So I'm just going to start with Article 2 because Article 1 is mostly the same. It's all substantially the same. The biggest parts of this is 226A. And in 226A, it talks about calling special meetings and how the procedure of doing so, that's just new. And then 2210, if you are following along with what I'm doing, which is talking about the internal, or I'm sorry, 2210. Sorry, scrolling. Is talking about decorum and how POs presiding officers can require decorum in meetings. It just wasn't outlined before. And then Article 6 talks about student councils. And this just added the city commission representative that we put into the Constitution earlier this semester. And then 264 talks about that's just the presiding officer succession. We just clarified how the procedure actually works and just what next person would preside over a student council because it was wrong in the old one. 267 describes specifically the charges or the responsibilities of the Community Affairs Council. And there we added that they're required to have an initiative of community events or community involvement. Just with the new changes to that council in general, we thought going back to the founding principles of that council may be beneficial into keeping that council around for as long as possible. And then 268D outlines student rights and affairs charges or responsibilities, and that is clarifying that we have the ability to have the housing presenters come in and share their new rates if specifically ASHC has a letter of intent saying that they don't agree, then we can look and say, why do you agree, and like have discussion about it. It's just saying we can do that if we want to. Okay, and then Article 8 talks about student senators. There was a clarifying thing here, specifically on divisions. It separates upperclassmen and lowerclassmen for above 60 credit hours and below 60 credit hours, just so it's uniform and there aren't any arguments on who's a freshman, sophomore, and who's a junior, senior. But that's all current practice. And then 283 clarifies what an on-campus student senator is, since we have new apartment buildings on campus that are considered on campus because the university leases them. It just clarifies that that counts as on campus. All right, and then Article 10 talks about the Internal Affairs Director, specifically 210.2I. It just enumerates the power of making sure that the Constitution is up to date with all of our amendments to the Internal Affairs Director because that's our current practice. Okay, and then Article 11 is entirely new just because it's the new City Commission representative. 3 and 4 did not have substantive change enough to continue to them specifically. So if you have questions, obviously ask me about them, but I'm going to skip 3 and 4 because they're substantially the same. So going to 5, because that's where the next biggest change comes from, is from the required student fee. 527A, it prohibits proxy votes during deliberations, just in accordance with Robert's rules. So you're allowed to have proxies during presentations so they can take your notes and give them to you, but during deliberations, you cannot have proxies vote for you. And then 5213 on the same thing, it just outlines a procedure for an emergency approval if necessary, like we had to discuss this year. Article 4 talks about block funding. This applies to block and line funding for this one. We basically just added a provision that we can't put any organization that receives this funding into a deficit by reducing their funding. And then Article 6 talks about Wednesday night funding. In this certain section, which is 565A, it clarifies that all Wednesday night funding must pass by a simple majority, so half plus one. In the old Constitution, there were 2 different sections saying that over $1,000, you had to have a 2/3 majority vote, and then in another section said you only had to have a simple majority, and in order for it to be uniform and with current practice, we just kept it as simple majority. Okay, Title VI. So we're going to start with Article 3, which is candidates. So 231 talks about the eligibility of candidates. It just requires that candidates are enrolled in at least 6 credit hours, except for graduate students because of their weird credit hour requirements. They could be in 1 credit hour but still be a full-time grad student, and we didn't want to kick anybody out of being eligible to run. So then Article 4 for coalitions, the new section is 644, which talks about changing coalitions, and it basically just says that you have to be stuck in the coalition that you chose by the deadline, and you can't switch it after the deadline. Okay, and then 654 talks about voting, and it specifically talks about how you are able to vote in all of the constituencies in which you are a member, because that wasn't explained before that. Okay, final one. Title VII. There's two things I wanted to talk about. First is the amendment made by the Community Affairs Council, just taking out the word diversity in the Community Development Fund, and replacing it with community. It's uniform anyway, and ensures that we're not going to have any legal issues with having diversity in there, and is substantially the same. And then Article 10 is something that we added during discussions, which is the Sustainability Advisory Board, just because there has been a lot of interest, at least I know in my council and other councils, for it to continue, even though it might not currently be as active as it could be. So we just left that in there, even though it's not entirely active. Okay, that's everything for the revision that I have. So I'm going to move to the University Senate Code amendments. Okay, I've tried to keep it super short because a lot of it looks like we made a ton of amendments, and we did, but that's because none of it is up to current practice if you're looking at any of the bills. So the biggest thing is that we updated all of the titles and what the senator seats are currently active. So it's going to look like we crossed out a whole bunch of senators, which we did, but that's because we had to rewrite them with their current titles. So that is all substantially the same of all of the active Senate seats. We deleted the mention of the Student Senate Constitution rules and regulations due to the fact that it doesn't exist and we don't use it. And we didn't want other documents to be mentioned that we don't actually use. We added the wording of Edward campus just because we're adding those Senate seats in our Senate, just make sure they're accurately represented there. We took out petitions because we don't use petitions anymore. It updates the executive council members, their titles, what people are on the executive council, and then updates the council list because there were councils on there that don't even exist anymore, and then changed the names of like community affairs. So that is all I have.
For clarification, the University Senate Code was last amended over a decade ago.
Yes. So it's very, very wrong.
Any questions for the Rights Chair, Tanya? Hold on, we are cold starting the mic process.
Okay. I had a question. So, in your speech regarding amendments to the Constitution, you discussed removal of the word diversity and replace it with the Community Development Fund. But you doing a quick comb through the Constitution, the word diversity still exists in other contexts, including the promotion of intercultural education. So my question is, why weren't all instances of it removed out of fear of legal issues in that case then?
I will give my answer and then I'll make sure that I'm reflecting it correctly. But it was in the specific charges of this advisory board, and because it's within the specific charges of the advisory board, it holds a higher standard than it just being added as a principle that we have. It was a requirement of the board that it had to be something of diverse nature. Can I explain? I'll say that's her amendment.
Kenna McNally, Community Affairs Council Chair. So this amendment was made at the request of the chair of the Community Development Fund, Monisha, and it was just made because since the Community Development Fund was one of those things we had to rename at the start of the school year, she believed that it had already previously been changed from diversity to community, and so she was just updating it with her understanding of current practice and what we did at the start of the fall.
The student body vice president.
You can grow it.
Ready?
Thank you. Thank you. So my question was specifically regarding the sustainability fund. Yeah. So this might not be a question you can directly answer, but I was curious. So will those remaining funds that haven't been allocated this year, will they be kept in this pot that can be allocated by the fund or the board? I guess
you can answer.
So we heard from, I believe, the treasurer and the fund development director, I think Matea too, that they are planning on like redesignating the funds that used to be for the Sustainability Advisory Board so that they can be used in other ways moving forward.
Okay.
Was that it?
I thought it goes back to general fund.
So, point of information, per Matea Gales, because these boards were created with this funding in mind, they have to be used for that. So even though like there's not a safety board in this new constitution, if there is leftover funding this year, then it like has to be used for safety stuff. It's not going to get reabsorbed into general stuff. And I'm getting a big head nod from Dr. Turtle. That's fantastic.
So that's from like Jason Horford, Vice President of Finance. He said the same thing.
Further questions? Any further questions? Nathan?
Hey, I'm Nathan. I'm a student senator for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I had a question on. Also, I just want to say this is so much easier to navigate. I was actually able to follow that. Thank you. But I had a question on section 6-5-4, talking about student senators now being able to vote in all constituencies of which they are a member. This may be a bit more of a question for the elections chair. But what would that look like logistically? Like on Rock Chalk Central, I think it kind of chooses your constituency right now. It only gives you one of them. But if you're like in two different schools, do you get 2 votes, like 1 vote for each of those schools? Do you get to choose? Do you know what that would look like? Or is that at the discretion of the elections chair?
Yeah, so think of it in the same way as like I, for example, get to vote in class elections because I'm under the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, but I also get to vote on off-campus senators because I'm also an off-campus student. So it'd be a similar, like, you just get to vote on those constituencies. So the student body president, for example, was giving a good example in the meeting that we had about how, like, if you have a business minor, you'd be able to vote in the business school as well as if you are in class or you're in the engineering school or whatever, you get to vote in both of those constituencies because you're a member of both. Yes.
Further questions? Or sorry, Donnie, did you have a question? I'm so sorry. I see the people who are closest to me first.
Ready? Okay, perfect. It didn't hit me in the face this time. Okay. On that note, I did have a question. So, like students at the law school can take classes for like outside of the law school. So, like for instance, other graduate courses, like even those in like the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So, just to clarify, like for instance, if I were to take a class in say the Department of like Biology or the School of Business, would I then be allowed to like vote like under like graduate student status technically in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences?
It would depend on whether or not you're a member of that constituency. So if you're enrolled, like for the business school specifically, you'd have to be a business student. So you would have to be admitted into the business school to vote under business, like the business one. For class, I still don't think that would be, you wouldn't be considered a member of taking one class.
Hang on. The student body vice president.
You? Yes. So I was curious, kind of along that same point. Yeah. So do you have to like be enrolled in credit hours within that like school to vote? So if that's the case, like if I have a certificate in like the School of Business or something, could I vote for the School of Business elections?
It would depend if you're a student in the School of Business. So if you did a certificate, if you had to apply to the School of Business, then you'd be a student of the School of Business and then you could vote in that constituency. But like I've taken a class in the business school, but I'm not a business student, so I wouldn't be voting under that constituency.
So any university recognized like professional
Right.
pursuit
Right.
of within a college would count as you could vote for them.
They take the information from like enroll and pay. So if
Okay.
on enroll and pay it says like you're in the business school, etc., it would be any of that information.
Further questions? Any further questions?
Can I ask one more?
Sure. If there are no further questions, student body vice president.
No, I'm good. Thank you. So the sustainability board, is that a yearly term?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Is that the same for the safety boards as well?
Yeah, they should all be year terms.
Okay. Perfect.
Further questions? All right. I do believe we have an amendment on hand.
I got you.
Hold on. Do you want to come up to the front? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey. All right. You just need like 5 minutes for this.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Sweet. Zach is recognized for 5 minutes to discuss his amendment.
Just to, be very brief and quick about this, because I know a lot of us, we've been here for a while. But this bill would amend Title I, Article 1, Section 11 regarding accessibility in this new constitutional revision. The way it was originally worded would have a lot of stuff ran through the Internal Affairs Director, being the deciding person on how stuff would be implemented, what should be implemented. And this is just not a great way to go about this kind of system. We already have the infrastructure at KU through the Student Access Center to create accommodations and have an accommodation process that we would follow. And so I spoke earlier this week with Jeffrey Chasen, the Assistant Vice Provost for Employee Growth, Development, Accessibility, and Inclusion, to discuss the proper ways to go about requesting accommodations for an organization like Student Senate. Main things that change in this bill are the inclusion of the Student Access Center in this Constitution. Essentially, a member who needs or requests accommodations for Student Senate would originally go to the Student Access Center to request those accommodations, or they would be referred by the Internal Affairs Director if they chose to disclose with them. The Student Access Center has dealt with dozens of accommodations for classes and other student organizations. And so they would have all of the resources necessary when it comes to determining what accommodations be necessary for any kind of disabilities or restrictions that a person may have. They would decide what appropriate accommodations would be for a bill like this and pass it on to the Internal Affairs Director, who in turn would review that, see if it was feasible to implement. If not, voice their concerns to the SAC, and the SAC would get final say on whether to move forward or if there would need to be new accommodations proposed. Okay. One of the the Internal Affairs Director would remain the person to enact these kind of accommodations. They'd be given the powers to coordinate with all branches of student government to achieve the fulfillment of this requirement. Additionally, there is a clause in here for purchasing equipment or modifying the operations of Student Senate. This is, right here. These modifications or purchasing equipment is normally handled through the SAC. They are very willing and very helpful when it comes to this kind of stuff. But should something not be approved by them, it can be sent to the Student Executive Council to approve funds for this kind of a purchase. The only things that are really huge for this bill is the inclusion of the Student Access Center, and as well introducing a clause for confidentiality, making sure that members who would request accommodations would have their privacy remain. Any questions?
Any questions for Zach? Yes.
Thank you. I'm Hardesty, Senator for College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Junior Senior Division. I just asked, you mentioned that you had talked to some people within the Student Access Center. Did you happen to talk to them about what the process for requesting that accommodation would be? Like, would a student do that through their SAC portal, or would it be a more informal request directly to the office. So is it something like they would need? Because I just wasn't aware that you could request accommodations for an student organization with it through the SAC. So if you could kind of talk about what you know about the process, at least, because I know you're not like a representative of them, but if they talked about that with you at all.
Yeah. So it would be through the portal for the SAC. They want to be able to verify that they would have documentation in regards to any accommodation requests, whether it's justified, and just making sure that they have everything covered. I was suggested to do this process because it would be the most applicable for students, as it's the Student Access Center, but also because there is not a whole lot of difference when it comes to accommodations being implemented for classes and student organizations.
Further questions? Nathan.
So the Student Access Center obviously does really important work here at KU, and they do a great job of making specifically like courses and like in-person classes more accessible. But what I was wondering was kind of how that could apply to Senate, or how it would apply to Senate in your eyes. Do you have kind of an example that you could maybe give, or maybe a little bit of clarification there? Because I just want to kind of avoid the situation where maybe like the Internal Affairs Director refers it to the SAC and then they refer it back to the Internal Affairs Director. Just kind of how that process would proceed smoothly.
So a lot of the process here, the SAC will reach out to whoever is involved with the accommodations procedure, right? So for Senate, that would be through the Internal Affairs Director. That's who they would be directed to. And so any accommodation requests that they receive would be directed to them. I'm sorry, what was the first part again?
So like one example that you mentioned was an interpreter.
Yes. So should someone have a disability such as they are hard of hearing, or perhaps they have loss of sight, an interpreter or an aide to help them through regular discussion through Senate processes would be an appropriate accommodation in some cases.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, are there any objections to proceeding to a vote on this amendment? Hearing none, we will get that posted to the Assembly voting channel. It is posted now. Vote in favor of the amendment if you are in favor of the changes proposed. Vote against if you are in favor of keeping the current accessibility section. This will be a 1-minute vote, and this motion requires a majority vote for passage. In favor. I guess I'll get one posted for.
So CPEP. Dismissal's tired.
Mine is like so. I didn't have any questions about it.
I'm gonna make a negative speech, by the way.
For my vote, for yours.
Why?
If you would, I would cry. I would just be like, no, never mind.
Right. On the question of amending Bill 2025-069, Annex 1, Section 1111, accessibility, according to the amendment presented by Zach Lemke, in favor 31, opposed 0, abstaining 4. Accordingly, the motion is carried and the amendment is made. We will return to discussion of the bill. We are in the part of the proceedings for motions or speeches. Do you have a motion? Motion to vote. Second from, Tanya. Motion from the assumed by Vice President, second from Tanya. Are there any objections to proceeding to a vote on Bill 2025-069? All right, hearing none, that poll is posted now in the Assembly voting channel. This bill will require a 2/3 vote for passage, as it is an amendment to the Student Senate Constitution and the University Senate Code. Vote in favor if you are in favor of these revisions. Vote opposed if you are opposed to them. This will be a 1.5-minute vote.
You're not gonna come to Tori? You're not gonna come to Yeah.
She's come to a few assemblies. Yeah. It's gonna be loud. Inside.
I mean, we have 30 seconds.
Where's Emma? She's sitting in the same place.
Did you present the resolution? Do you have like a presentation file for it?
No, I was not. Just get that out. Yeah. She was here earlier. Like, I don't know when she left. 3 minutes from. I'm not expecting to watch
Do we have any voice votes on this one or no? Oh, okay, so 36. The Assembly will return to order. On the question of passage of Bill 2025-069, entitled a bill to adopt a revised constitution, in favor 34, opposed 0, abstaining 3. Accordingly, the bill passes unanimously. For context, I started working on the revision in July, so this has been almost a year-long project. Relieved, very relieved. All right. Thank you, everyone, but we have to move on with our agenda tonight. Next on the agenda for regular legislation is Resolution 2025-307, a resolution to express support for Haskell Indian Nations University.
Yeah. Here, I'll let you.
Here you are. Switch this over to the viewing mode. Is this good for you?
Yeah.
All right. How much time do you want?
Like
20? That's going good.
I was gonna say like 5 minutes.
Questions too.
6 minutes?
15. Yeah,
15? Okay.
That's our last thing.
I mean, I don't know.
Is he telling you how much time you should take?
Yeah.
Emma Hardesty is recognized for 15 minutes for the presentation of this resolution.
Hello, everyone. Oh. Hi. I understand this is our last piece of legislation for the night, so I will make it very, very quick. Well, not very quick, but probably not the full 15 minutes. But for those of you who may not know, on February 14th of this year, approximately 35 to 40 employees of Haskell Indian Nations University were fired under nationwide cuts to federal employees under the new administration. This was about 25 to 30% of their workforce. The decision to fire these employees was made on the federal level. Haskell is one of the two universities operated under the Bureau of Indian Education as required by treaty obligations. So they are under the federal government. So these cuts have affected almost every department of their campus. The Monday after those the firings, students went to classes without instructors. Clubs and extracurriculars lost their sponsors and coaches. Student services were impeded or some just stopped altogether.
Financial aid was delayed, student events were postponed and canceled, and almost a third of their employees lost their support system and source of income without any warning or cause, as there was no proper justification for these firings ever provided. Remaining faculty and staff were asked to take over a lot of the administrative and instructional duties of those who were fired, which on top of their own responsibilities, students also had to take on some additional burdens as well, especially cleaning, as the university was left with only 4 custodians to clean their 270,000 square feet of campus. Haskell is a very small, close-knit school, so they didn't just lose their employees. People lost friends and colleagues, mentors, their support systems, and people they considered family members. There's also been a significant lack of communication between the community and both levels of administration, and many questions still remain unanswered. There's also, after 3 weeks away, instructors were hired back for the rest of the semester, first as adjunct lecturers and then later as just reinstated. However, you can imagine in a college class how difficult it can be to catch up after 3 weeks of no content, as both on the instructor's side and on the student side. And imagine that for 34 of the classes that you teach. Haskell recently made announcements that several of their the employees who were let go have returned or will be returning, including administrative assistants, athletic staff, and housing and dining staff. However, the letter did not say how many employees are returning, when they will be returning, or if they're rehired on a temporary or more permanent basis. That information has not been made public yet. Many have also just not been rehired, and personal adjustments have been made to try and fill those gaps. For example, the Haskell Student Success Center, which in their case is essentially like a center for like academic advising, so kind of similar to what we have at KU. That has been on a temporary abeyance now, as none of their staff has been hired back. So academic advising has been allocated to faculty. However, some people have not been assigned faculty members to be their advisors yet. And as you can imagine, like faculty members are probably not used to doing academic advising on top of their not actual responsibilities, their other responsibilities. There's also serious concern that Haskell may be the target of another cut to employees in the near future under the BIE's submitted agency RIF and reorganization plans that were required by the White House on March 13th. Essentially, all federal organizations were required to submit something and encouraged to make serious cuts to their employees. Anyways, I could go on and on about how this has negatively impacted Haskell, but I don't have much time, so I just want to be clear here. This is not just a staffing issue. It's a direct attack on the institutional stability of Haskell, and the fight here is far from over. KU and Haskell have a long history of cooperation and respect. Both of our universities frequently collaborate through academic programs, student services, and resource sharing, and both have formally reaffirmed this partnership through our Memorandum of Understanding, which was recently renewed by both universities in November of 2024. This resolution calls for KU administration to just honor their commitments that they made in this memorandum and work with Haskell to explore further avenues for support during this ongoing crisis, and encourages students and student organizations to do the same. It's basically like a formal stand in support of Haskell, including their student, staff, and faculty. Essentially, this issue affects all of us. Haskell is not just a university across town. It's a part of Lawrence, just like we are as KU students, and it has been for 140 years. I mean, it's part of our history and our shared present and future with Haskell students. And Haskell students are our peers, our neighbors, and our friends. And I believe that we owe it to them to help and make sure their voices are heard just as they have done for us. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Any questions for the presenter, student body vice president?
What is your motivation for writing this resolution?
That's a great question. I'm from the city of Lawrence, so Haskell has always been something that's culturally very, very important to the city. And I also have friends that go to Haskell and friends that have been students of both Haskell and KU. And many of them had expressed concerns to me about this and asked if I could do something in Senate. And, as I think there's been a lot of talk these last few cycles about what a resolution, like what the point of a resolution is. And I think as senators, we are public servants and it's our job to be sort of like the direct line of communication to the university. And if we want the university to, the resolution is pretty open-ended in how it will help, how it wants KU to help Haskell. It's just kind of working with them and figuring out what works best for both institutions. But I think it's just important that students' voices are heard, that this is something that we want, and this is something we want the KU to at least explore and see if it's a viable option for solutions.
Further questions? Yes. Could we please get a catch box passed back?
Oh, sorry.
Fourth row to the back, closest to the wall.
Ready?
Nice.
Thank you. Ben Shea, music senator. I'm just wondering, you noted that the federal cuts by the Trump administration were the main cause to this issue. I'm just wondering why you didn't, in the Be It Resolved section, call on the federal government to restore the funding that caused this.
Just because this wouldn't be sent to the federal government, I guess. And KU doesn't really have any direct control about the federal government. I guess I could have said something about that, but I don't think it would have reached any important stakeholders in the federal government. But this is more specifically just a broad statement of support for Haskell, but also just seeing if KU can do anything to aid them during this time, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Further questions? Any further questions? Hearing none, we have entered the period for motions and debate. Chair of the Community Affairs Council. Motion from the Chair of the Community Affairs Council to vote. Second from the Associate Senator for the Finance Council. Are there any objections to proceeding to a vote on this legislation? All right, hearing none, we will get that posted to the Assembly voting channel. All right, that poll is posted now under the Assembly voting channel. Please fill it out. This, God damn it.
True.
Might be, reload it.
Chris, can you email this?
All right, everyone reload the poll. It's fixed now. Sorry about that. All right. I didn't start the time yet, so it's fine. All right, please vote. This resolution takes a majority vote for passage. This will be a 1.5-minute vote.
That'd be so intuitive. Bro, this is actually no. I mean, actually, me and my brother came already.
What is Kenna?
I know. Motion to get another mug. Motion for me and Nathan to get one of those mugs. Motion for me and Nathan to get one of those mugs.
The assembly will return to order. Promise this is the last time. Everyone, please stop talking. On the question of passage of Resolution 2025-307, a resolution to express support for Haskell Indian Nations University, in favor 30, opposed 0, abstaining 0. Accordingly, the resolution is passed unanimously. We have reached the end of our regular legislation for tonight. Are there any announcements to be made to the assembly? Yes.
KK Mini's having their drag show April 26th. Once again, I'm hosting it. You guys should come because we got Green Queens Reese 2 performers.
Are you performing?
But you should still come because who knows? April 26th, Scholarship Hall's KK Mini at 7, or the doors open at 6:30, 7 p.m.
Thank you. Any further announcements? Any further announcements? Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion from the Student Body Vice President, second from the Associate Senator for the Finance Council. Are there any objections? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank God. Well,
No, but why are you coming back?
The only reason I
What about next year's speed? What if they're like?
Twice my internal affairs, city commission representative, everyone for University Senate. That's like the body of University Senate.
Beautiful, beautiful. Lauren, little Bill. Lauren.
No, the university. No.
Back me up. You can't not read this.
Yeah, yes, this sounds like.
Do you want to do a conversation, please?
No, I'm not doing it on time. I am going to be on campus next year. But I'm going to spend.
Teams is probably good. So like,
There's
okay.
no-
I
That I've been getting like automatic.
Do you need a ride?
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
What edits did you make to the revision? If I'm looking at the version history, it says you edited stuff.
The revision was just
9 minutes ago?
Can you say what you do the lecture?
And I really did that.
Can you say what you don't want to?
Say one for what?
Just like that
In
10 minutes. I mean, heck, you said right here.
I gotta go talk to you.
Do your due diligence. Yeah, let's go. Good luck.
Shay, can we end the live stream? Technically,